good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's McKaylee. I work with Tattered Cover Bookstore. For those of you who might not have joined us on a virtual event yet, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for spending your Wednesday evening with us. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, especially in the States, and so we cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us and to be a part of our virtual community that we have here. For those of you who are back and this is not your first virtual event you've done with Tattered Cover, thank you for joining us again. Thank you for continuing to come back. You know, it is because of the continued support of the community, you know, specifically the Denver metro community where Tattered Cover is located, for those of you who might not know. It's really due to the support of the communities and now our virtual community that we are able to continue doing events like this. It's amazing that we have been able to spend almost 50 years in Denver. In the Denver metro area, Tattered Cover turns 50 next year. And that is just always due to the support of this community, the fact that you guys shop local and just continue to, you know, be with us and support local businesses. So thank you for that. If you are in the Denver metro area, you are more than welcome to stop in at one of our 4 locations that we have, as long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose. We appreciate you coming in. We do have hand sanitizer and gloves for those that come into the stores, and we ask that you only spend about 90 minutes or so in the stores, but you can still come in and get your books and shop locally with us. If you want to stay inside and stay in your pajamas, I totally understand. And our website is open 24/7 at tatteredcover.com. And so what you can do is go on and shop. We're really excited because we're in the midst of trying to come up with some more browsing options for you guys so that you can kind of get as much of the experience of being in a bookstore as it is online, as much as we can, because we understand that old bookstore smell is just never gonna be replaced. So I want to just also let you know that this video does have closed captioning enabled. So for those of you who might want it or need it, all you have to do is on the video screen that you're watching me on right now, just hover your mouse over it, and down at the bottom there's a button that says CC. Click that button and closed captioning will be enabled. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of that feature. Now, I want to introduce our author tonight. This is, you know, I started this book and I'm so excited to just continue on this journey. It really is something very unique and fascinating and well written, and it's my honor tonight to introduce Dr. Shirley Ann Higuchi, JD, chair of the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, also known as HMWF. She is the daughter of former incarcerees Dr. William I. Higuchi and the late Setsuko Saito Higuchi. Her American-born parents were children when they were incarcerated at Heart Mountain during World War II. Shirley became a lawyer because she believed the US judicial system denied her parents legal due process, but her activism in the Japanese American community was inspired by her mother's deathbed admission that she was donating tens of thousands of dollars to build something at Heart Mountain. In addition to her work with Heart Mountain, Shirley is currently Associate Executive Director of the Office of Legal and Regulatory Affairs in the American Psychological Association's Practice Directorate. She has been a longtime activist in the District of Columbia Bar and was elected as its president in 2003. In 2014, Shirley was appointed to the Federal Law Enforcement Nominating Commission by Congressman Eleanor Holmes Norton, Democrat, DC. And so I want to start us off by showing the trailer for Setsuko's Secret. And it's going to be the book trailer here. So give me just a moment to set this up with technology. Alrighty, and so here we are. So please enjoy the book trailer as we get started here. I apologize for everyone with the audio. It accidentally muted the entire audio rather than just me, but we got that fixed, so you still got to hear the beautiful music there. So thank you to everyone who alerted me to that. I appreciate that. And I'm glad that we were able to still get the full effect of the music along with the book trailer. So now it is my pleasure to formally introduce Dr. Shirley Ann Higuchi, and I'm going to ask her to turn on her video and her microphone to join me.
Hi.
Hi, Shirley. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just so excited that you're doing so many wonderful events here, but I'm really just happy that you included Tattered Cover on your stop. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So we got kind of an introduction into the book, into this story with beautiful visuals and pictures that from the book trailer. But I'd love it if we could hear a bit in your own words what this book is about and how did this journey start for you?
Well, the book is just that. It's a journey. It really started, and I think you and I had talked earlier about my mother's death in 2005 when she was dying of pancreatic cancer. And as a child, she was incarcerated at Heart Mountain along with my father. They were just kids, which is really hard to believe. And we really knew about it a little bit, but we really didn't know the impact on my family. So on her deathbed, she wanted her coat-in, her memorial money to go to Heart Mountain. And sort of, yeah, I know. And like a week or so later, I got this phone call from Pat Wolf in Wyoming, wanting me and my family to come out because they wanted to honor my mother. And nobody wanted to go. And at the last minute, I decided to go. And the whole experience of arriving at the Heart Mountain site and meeting all the people there was tremendously overwhelming. So that's sort of the genesis of the book.
Yeah, and we had talked earlier a little bit before we went live with everyone about community, and this book trailer really showed it, right? It was naming and highlighting all of the people that you got to meet through this process. And so I'd love it if you could just dive in a little bit. You know, we're going to talk about writing process and your research, but I'd love it if you could start us off, because seeing all those amazing people that had an impact on you and your family, you know, what was it like meeting them and collaborating with them on this book? And just if you could talk to that, that would be wonderful.
Well, it's very complicated because the Japanese American incarceration experience is very complicated.
Yeah.
Part of that history, my father and mother's generation and many of my colleagues' generation, they're referred to as Nisei, which is second generation. And the Nisei were known to be very quiet Americans. So the ability to get all these characters and my colleagues and the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation community to really open up, it virtually was a process, and it was something that was very challenging. And with respect to writing, I've written articles in the past and I've worked on an academic book in the past, but this is very different. I mean, this is a memoir that's interwoven with major characters that span about 100 years. So it really required me to not only exhibit my own personal experiences, but get these characters to really come to life throughout this storytelling adventure. The other part that I'm really proud of, and it's really due to the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation staff, we have an excellent staff, the research and the archives, yes, and the ability to pull all the records from the WRA relocation files that are at the National Archives, our own archives, is really what really supported this book, along with, I would say, God, anywhere from 50 to 100 personal interviews that I did every year at our annual pilgrimage.
Wow, that's incredible. Where that like, wow, the amount of work and dedication that took. You know, what for you? Did you start with the archives, or did you really start with the people first and go with the interviews?
Well, what really happened was, you know, in 2005, after my mom died, the board asked me to join to replace my mother's seat. She was actually a live board member at that point, supporting this organization, supporting a museum to be created. And I kind of ignorantly, I have to be honest with you, I was like a Japanese American incarceration dummy. Like I had to get one of those books to tell me, you know, the details of my own family history. But then when I realized that it was really important for me to start documenting my experience, and that especially started in 2008 when they elected me chair. So I always had my assistant right now is Julie Abo. I always had assistants like Helen Yoshida and Hannah Mariam and others that would literally start recording and interviewing folks around me and taking photographs. So this has been a process that began when I joined the board. But what we started doing originally, and I think this is part of my experience as a Japanese American and feeling a little bit muffled to tell the story, is it's really hard to do, I think, a memoir on a topic that is so painful. And then on top of it, doing all this extensive, I mean, this is a very bulletproof documented book, which is great for history classes and teachers, but to even get myself to open up in itself was very different for me. So what we tried to do is have like individual chapters, and I tried to get each person to write their own story, and then I was just going to be the one that knitted them together. But over and over again, what I was told is, no, you have to tell the story from your own personal experience to give it more depth and meaning. So that's essentially, you know, the process that I experienced.
Yeah, and you can feel that in the book, even within, you know, like I said before, I haven't had the pleasure of finishing it, but even in the beginning, in the first half that I've read, you really feel your heart behind it, and your grief and your confusion of as trying to navigate the history and figuring out yourself alongside figuring out your mother and family history and what Heart Mountain meant and what they were trying to turn it into. And I'm curious about this project, you know, and how this came to your mother and then how it came to you, because it's such a very, to take some place that was so harmful and had terrible memories with it and trying to bring it into the light is such a noble cause. How did that come to your mother first, and then obviously how it fell into your lap? But you didn't have to continue it. You know, you didn't have to pick up the mantle.
Right. Yeah, that's a really, really, really good question. Again, a very complicated answer for this.
Yeah.
As simple as possible. Well, you know, what's really interesting is I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and this is the book description. It's one of the chapters, and there weren't any other Japanese Americans there. All my friends were Black and white, which had its advantage because it really educated me on how to relate to a larger community besides the Japanese Americans. So that's helpful. But I think not being exposed to the Japanese American community along with my family, it kept us very insulated. But my parents moved to Salt Lake City, Utah in 1981, which has a pretty healthy Japanese American community. I mean, there's a lot of history in Salt Lake. And so my mother got really interested in this issue, I think, because of her relationship with fellow incarcerees that she met in Salt Lake City, which sort of spurred her interest in her activism. But before she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2002, she did volunteer to work with Judge Raymond Una, who's a very famous judge in Salt Lake City, the first minority judge, and Dr. Jeanette Masaka, all incarcerees, all in the same class with my dad when they were just little kids. And they worked together to put on this really successful reunion in Salt Lake, which really gave my mom the ability to contribute and have a more visible, I guess, role in telling the story her own way. But I noticed that they set up this panel where former incarcerees, women mostly, talked about their incarceration experience. And my mom sort of bowed out and she asked me to talk for her, which I thought was kind of interesting because I wasn't there. I don't know what it was like. And I think that was my first realization in 2002 that she really wanted me to tell that story, even though she never asked me to tell that story. And then unfortunately, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer shortly after that. And she passed away in 2005. My need to pick up the mantle and carry that baton through the finish line really had to do when I visited Heart Mountain. And I encourage everyone, especially if you're in Colorado, it's not that far of a drive. And we're right near Yellowstone National Park. We have an award-winning, internationally known museum in the very place in which there was a huge amount of incarceration of Japanese Americans. I think there was like over 10,000 alone, and it was like the second largest city in Wyoming at that time. And you could also visit the various other sites in Cody Powell, like the Buffalo Bill, Historic Center of the West. So it really is, I have to say, it's just a enriching environmental experience to have the elements of Cody, the town, and Powell, which existed at that time, and then to actually visit our site, which replicates the feeling that you're actually at the incarceration site and what it was like to be there in 1942.
Wow, when I saw it, and I was reading the book and realizing how close it was to my hometown and how close to where I had grown up, I was shocked. It was something that I unfortunately never learned about in my education. And I know that I'm not alone in that travesty. And I'm curious, as you want people to go, obviously, and sometimes travel is hard in COVID. So what are you hoping people get out of the book when reading it, if they can't take the journey to Heart Mountain right now? Obviously, in the future, it'll be much easier. But what are you hoping that they get out of the book? And what did you take from Heart Mountain in that experience, trying to translate it into your story?
Well, I think what's really nice about the book, it's almost a reflection of what we are doing at the museum. So it's a really nice tool and a guide to introduce you to the incarceration and the important players and the significance of the Heart Mountain legacy. We also have a website, www.heartmountain.org, where our executive director has these brilliant pieces and exhibits that are all online. So if you actually take the book and you get online, you could actually have both the visual, the verbal, and as well as the book in your hand, reading that at your convenience. But in answer to your question more directly, I think what I'm trying to do is not whitewash a very important part of our history. And given the current climate today on what's happening around immigration and other detention camps being set up, it's just a very clear reminder, a constitutional reminder of what not to do in wartime hysteria. But it also is a reminder on how our media and how our communities and how our political leaders need to demonstrate strength and courage to speak out about things that are just not right. And so I hope that this book does that for your readers and for our communities.
Absolutely. And that's why, and that's why I'm so glad you're able to give these presentations virtually, because author tours are a large part of, promoting a book. There's so many books out there, but this is a very vital one and a very important one. I want to ask you very quickly about the title, because yes, this is your personal journey and this is your mother, but it's tied to, Heart Mountain. And what drove you to lean toward, what drove you to pick the title that you did for this?
Well, that's another excellent question. When it came to me when I was lying in my yoga class on a mat in the middle of the dark during Shavasana.
Where all best ideas come from.
And it's like, even though this is a really great documented history of what happened,
right.
I didn't want it to be like a pure academic book. And I wanted to draw in women readers and other daughters like me that are struggling with these issues. So Setsuko's secret is really, it really represents a larger secret that's been in the Japanese American community. It's not just my mother that doesn't want or didn't want to talk about. It's her colleagues and her other former incarcerees that don't talk about it either. So Setsuko's secret, I think, draws readers in to know that I'm trying to tell a lot of secrets in this book that I haven't talked about. But it's also the legacy of the Heart Mountain incarceration and what happened to over 120,000 individuals, 2/3 who were American citizens that basically had their constitutional rights violated. I mean, in the Supreme Court has acknowledged that. I think it was Justice Scalia, who has since passed, who said, this is one of the worst decisions that we've ever had, and it's constitutionally wrong, period, point blank. So we need to ask ourselves, how is it that something like this could happen in the United States? And we need to examine it as a community, and we need to figure out, how do we help our community not to revert back to that bad habit that happened in 1942?
Amen. Like, I want to just put that, yes, that was beautifully said. Thank you. I want to talk about the book itself and your writing process with this, because this was obviously this was a labor of love. This was not necessarily the easiest thing to do, to not only talk to others and get them to open up, but also to open up yourself. You talked about at the beginning of this interview how you kept getting pushed to make this your story at the heart of it. And I want to talk about the difference, how did you discern between what of your own stories you're going to put in there versus the academia? What did the editing process look like as you were trying to figure out what was at the heart of this story for you?
Well, I think what was really helpful is I had all the research, and luckily a couple of my family members kept really good documented journals on their experiences. Mm-hmm. And my cousin Vanessa, who actually made that beautiful film that film clip that we just saw, actually, I know, it's amazing. She actually she's a filmmaker in LA, and she actually videotaped a lot of the players that are in the book, and really was able to document. She even interviewed my uncle, Saito, on my mom's side, which gave a lot of insights. So the information was there. I had like 3 banker boxes of documents. But again, the staff at Heart Mountain and my partner, Ray Locker, who's also a journalist, really got me to really make this an integrated story that was very difficult to piece together, especially with the academic pieces sort of overlaying. And then in terms of the emotional, personal issues, I mean, that was a very, very difficult process. And let's just say that it's like going through psychotherapy or having therapy. And I would sit there and I'd be in the kitchen crying and say, well, I don't know if I should say that or not. I mean, it's just going to make people really upset. And, so we would go back and forth. And then I go to Julie and say, Julie, don't you think it's really bad that I'm talking about the stuff? And then she would either say yes or no. And then I'd run to my sister-in-law and say, do you think this is really, so it really was sort of a cumulative effort of really feeling comfortable talking about very, very personal things about my life. I mean, things that I don't really feel comfortable talking about, although now that it's written down, I guess, in black and white, I should, feel comfortable talking about it now. But, But to be honest with you, I took it about as far as I could without, I don't know how to say this, without like being out of line. I mean, or
Oh, yeah.
being not who I am or feeling disrespectful about things. But no, it was a really, really tough thing. It's like literally taking a dictionary, which is a well, documented and referenced book, and you open up the first word and then you start talking about your life as it relates to that word, like love, emotion, death, sickness, health, tragedy, triumph, and resilience. And when you talk about yourself, you realize there's a lot of pain behind those words.
Yeah, I love the way that you described that, taking the facts, but really trying to figure out how to integrate the heart into it and the people behind it, and that they're just not statistics or just names on a piece of paper. And I love the way you took that with the dictionary. That was a really great analogy. You speak of the collaborative nature of this, and we started off this interview that way. I'm curious how your relationships have changed or enhanced because of this book, with the people you've met, with your family, and maybe with your mom. Has that, how you see her, has that changed over the course of this process?
Well, again, that's a very, very good question. That's got a complicated answer. Let me start first with some of the characters that are in the book. In particular, the Nisei that I talk about, that they're now in their 80s or 90s. I think when I first came into the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, like a good Japanese American, they were skeptical of like, who's Shirley Ann? Does she know enough about Japanese American issues? I heard she grew up in Michigan around people who weren't Japanese American. She doesn't know anything, So I got a lot of pushback in terms of my role in the foundation and my capacity to tell the story. And that's a very common theme among the Nisei. As a matter of fact, when you read the book, one of the conversations I had with my mother that's documented in here is that she always wanted to frame the camp sort of as a fun place to be. And then when I tried to push back and say, hey, wait a minute, wasn't that a really bad experience? It really kind of frustrated her, and she kind of snapped at me. And she said, this is my story, not yours. So, and I'm like, whoa, and so I think what I've been able to do, and I hope for those who are listening, I'm speaking the truth, but I think I was able to gain the respect of my colleagues and the Nisei generation, an older generation that I'm not part of, and it really transformed those relationships. Another really important piece in answer to your question is, the fact that we didn't talk about it and we were very dependent on my mother to really keep our family together. After her death, it was very difficult for us to function essentially without her, and so as a result, Heart Mountain, this book, as well as the foundation, has given greater meaning and connection to my family members, the older ones that were incarcerated, but also my cousins and my children, and my entire community. And it's almost like, in some respects, the book and the foundation has been a gift. I mean, it really was a gift that when you lose somebody like your mother, who you're so attached to and basically orchestrated everything about your life and your father and your siblings' life, it's a gift that you could get to know your beloved one, like my mother, more about her after her death, because there were things that she just didn't talk about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's a gift, I believe, to the reader too, and the way that you're able to share this and this human experience of a mother-daughter relationship and this historical American and Japanese American experience. It's a gift to the reader as well, and I think you've done that beautifully. So thank you for that courage. I'm curious if there's something next. Is there more to this story that you want to tell? Is there another book in the works? Whether something more factual, if you need your heart to heal a little bit more, is what's next for you as an author?
Well, I think the one thing that we're really interested in doing is doing more filmmaking. And I'm actually in the process of working with my cousin on a 5-minute film, which is basically expanding that trailer.
Yeah.
So we'll give you more of a sort of soup to nuts educational experience about the Japanese American incarceration and my book, Setsuko's Secret. So I think filmmaking is high on the agenda. Also, we're exploring working with Secretary Norman Mineta, who's one of the famous Japanese Americans in my book. He was Secretary of Commerce and Transportation, both under Clinton and George W., and then with Senator Alan K. Simpson. And this will be more of a graphic novel, with graphic cartoon type, that kind of thing, which is really in some ways a different way of telling a story to the younger generation. Also, I'm working with the Heart Mountain team to republish 2 books that were published back in 1942. Estelle Ishigo, who's a Caucasian woman, and it's in my book, who was married to a Japanese American guy. She lost her job and she went with her husband into Heart Mountain, even though she was white. And then she was hired by the War Relocation Authority, the government, to document everything through these beautiful drawings, sketches, and artwork, which we do now have the rights to her book. So we're actually going to try to republish it and do an epilogue on work that we've done since her artwork. And we've had exhibits at the museum. There was a public auction where her work was being sold off, and we were able to cancel the auction and save the artwork. And so that's a really exciting thing. Another really great character in my book that you guys are going to love is Clarence Matsumura. Was just a young man when he was incarcerated at Heart Mountain. And he actually enlisted to fight for the US government, even though his family, and he was being incarcerated at Heart Mountain. And then he actually liberated Dachau and rescued Sally Ganor, who just recently passed away. So we actually got the rights to republish that book. But, a Japanese American young man who's incarcerated by his own country during World War II goes over and rescues a Jewish Lithuanian prisoner who's being incarcerated under the Nazi regime. I mean, it's sort of like, God, I mean, it's a fabulous story.
Where's that movie? Come on now.
I know that, and that's the reason why films are so important.
Mm-hmm.
And as you probably know, it's hard to make a feature film.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of resistance in Hollywood to have, Asian American stars, really grace the silver screen. So hopefully somebody will catch on to my book and say, you know what, we need to make a movie about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know that I appreciate, and not nearly as much as many other readers have and are going to appreciate, the fact that you're taking these unfortunately untold stories of history and bringing them to light with this book, and then with future projects and with Heart Mountain as well. We want to open up to questions from our audience. So a lot of you have been active in the chat already. Thank you guys for doing that. We had a lot of people talking about where they were watching in from, and that's always really fun to see the viewership spread across the nation. So if you have any questions for Shirley about her book, about Heart Mountain, about her research, please feel free to ask them in the chat. I know that we had one earlier, and it was talking, and it said, and you kind of did answer this, but maybe you can elaborate on it a little bit more, of, did you interview folks in the Powell or other surrounding communities? Did you focus on the communities and not those who were just directly related to Heart Mountain?
Yes, well, that's a really great question. A lot of our documentation and interviews were done by local residents. As everyone knows, Senator Al Simpson is a great supporter of Heart Mountains. We interviewed him extensively, along with his brother Pete, who's well known, and also a professor at University of Wyoming. What's crazy about Al and Pete is that when they were kids in 1942, the same age as my parents, they went into the camp and actually established relationships with the Japanese American kids. So Secretary Norman Mineta, who's a big figure in my book, and Senator Alan Simpson actually met as young kids. I think they were like 10 or 11 years old, and they were Boy Scouts. And now they're lifelong friends. They both served in the Senate, and it's just in Congress. And they're still in my life. I mean, we're talking like full 360-degree exposure of these kids back in 42 and how today we're still working hand in hand to tell the story together.
Wow, that's so great. Again, that's a great movie too.
I know.
So many.
I mean, those two are amazing men, and big-hearted, warm, loving, but also very distinguished in their careers. But yet, their friendship was born out of a tragic situation. And the one thing that they've really represented in our lives, and it's in my book, is how they can work across the aisles. It doesn't make a difference if you're Democrat or Republican. You could always have a civil conversation and work together as a team.
Yeah, damn right. So we do, these are not necessarily questions, but there are some people that are thanking you in the chat for these. So I want to read these out real quick here. Alicia says, thank you for telling me stories. So many of us weren't told much from family. It was too uncomfortable from them, but it is important to be told what happens. And then Sue says, thank you so much. I can't wait to pick this up and read it. I'm grateful for all the work you did to put this together. So sometimes it may not be questions, but it's nice to hear those remarks, especially for people who have very similar experiences to yours. Have you talked to obviously you've talked to other children, but of incarcerees, but did more come out of the woodwork? I'm curious. Like, did people write you letters when you were finding out about this? Like, or did you actively go search out more people? How did the children come to you, so to speak, seeking more information?
Well, it's funny when you write a book like this, given the fact it's really a full circle book where it's my grandparents coming to Japan in the early 1900s, and now it's all the way up to present day issues and the opening of our museum. You don't really know what part of the story is going to resonate most with the community. But the one part that has really blossomed a lot in terms of my online events, in my work with other Japanese Americans in the community, those that were incarcerated and those that are children of the incarcerees, is the issue of multi-generational trauma and the need to really speak out and talk about your experiences. And the one thing that I've learned is that, people assume, well, if you were in the camp, you were affected by it. But if you're a child of a survivor, then it has no real impact on you. And so that myth sort of was shattered by work I've been doing with Dr. Satsuki Ina, who is a psychotherapist and was also incarcerated at Tule Lake, one of the 10 major camps that incarcerated Japanese Americans. She's been leading these healing circles with Suru for Solidarity. That's www.suru.com and or .org. But it really gave our community an opportunity to talk about their own experiences. And I know that sounds really simple, but it isn't.
No, it doesn't sound simple at all. It's a nuanced, complicated tangle of generational issues that were put on by others. And no, it does not sound simple in the slightest. So no, thank you for sharing that. But you mentioned something that kind of leads into another comment here. Mark says, my mother was interned at Poston, Arizona. Like many nieces, she didn't talk about the camp. So I'm curious, how much of it did you venture outside of Heart Mountain? And do you think you'll continue to maybe do work about the other major camps as well?
Well, that's an excellent question as well. And I have an answer for it, and it's in the book.
Yeah.
Since Heart Mountain was a leader in the Japanese American community by having our museum, what we ended up doing is working with other major Japanese American stakeholders. And so we formed the Japanese American Confinement Sites Consortium, where we connect with all the camps in the United States and all the museums and all the Japanese American entities to support each other and advocate together for more resources. Wow. So essentially, I tried the best that I can to stay connected to all the camps and be as supportive as I can to help them with their own organizational and funding issues. So the answer is yes, 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 yes. We're really stronger as a community together than we are working in our silos. And that's another issue in the Japanese American community historically. It's almost like the Japanese Americans were fractured as a community. When you're ripped off the West Coast in California, or you're put in camps, you're scattered throughout the United States, there's an implicit and explicit message from the US government. We don't want any of you to actually know or work with each other. We want you to assimilate into white mainstream society and not congregate as a community. So in a lot of ways, the government's plan in 1942 really worked for the Japanese Americans, but there was a huge price for that assimilation, which is you lose contact with your community and your history.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just horrible to think about another thing being taken away. And the fact that you guys, though, now are rebuilding that and taking it back is
right.
Astounding to see. What advice do you have for educators wanting to introduce this topic into their classrooms, which has not typically been taught in classrooms before?
Well, I suggest that you buy the book. And
well, yes, that is the first obvious one. Absolutely.
Also, you could get on, the Heart Mountain website. And one of the things that we are really successful in is securing 2 national education grants to actually teach about the incarceration. Unfortunately, with the COVID virus, we were going to have, I think it was, like over 75 teachers come to Heart Mountain and spend 2 weeks there to be immersed in the Japanese American experience and be able to go through our museum and connect with the artifacts. And so we are developing a curriculum and materials to support all that and have a bunch of teachers and professors lined up. So definitely get on our website, and also our executive director and our staff can direct you to other camps and other resources and connect you with any groups that you're interested in. So but it's really important that this educational piece is in our school systems, and that's one of the big pushes that the Japanese American educators and our community is trying to do. This should be in our history books.
Yes.
And when I grew up, nothing about the Japanese American incarceration. Again, a very strong message that's being told to you: don't talk about this part of our nation's history because it's embarrassing. It makes people look bad. And when people find out that our country actually ran a camp, a prison camp for American citizens, people go, what? And it's not only just the everyday person. I've talked to judges and lawyers who are still stunned about what happened, and they just can't wrap their heads around it.
So the best way for you to educate yourself, educators and readers alike, is to get a copy of this book, which you can get on tattercover.com. It looks as though we're out of questions here, but I think that's a really great place to end on, of encouraging people to buy the book, do their research, educate themselves, because making sure you can put in as much work as you have, Shirley, and you've honored us with your personal stories and your research and the Heart Mountain team bringing that to light. But if people don't read it and if people don't talk about it, then it might disappear again, and we can't have that happen. So we definitely encourage everyone to get their copy today, which you can do at tattercover.com or by visiting one of our 4 stores. Shirley, I want to give you a moment to say anything else that you might want to add on tonight. Talk about where people can find you online. You've mentioned wonderful resources, but about you specifically, anything you want to say before we close out here?
Well, again, the best way to reach me is to get on our website, and there's information on how to get in touch with anyone there and myself, and we're available to assist. I can't overemphasize how meaningful and impactful it is for you to visit the Heart Mountain site. I mean, you remember, this is part of my book. It was transformational. And a lot of psychologists have made comments that the purpose of visiting a site and a purpose of going to a pilgrimage and experiencing that is transformational, but it's also healing. Yeah. So I really encourage you to do that. Our museum is open, and if you get online, you could actually make a personal appointment, and our executive director is willing to show you around the site. We have original barracks that are still there, the hospital barrack where my mother had her appendix out and my aunt was born in that barrack. It's still there. And we're now renovating and refurbishing the actual root cellar where the Japanese Americans used to grow vegetables and roots and other vegetables and things. And it was all stored in that. So you could actually now go eventually through that root cellar and experience what it was like to be in that root cellar in 1943, 44.
Oh my gosh. Just like,
I know.
honestly, I know there's not necessarily a lot of Denver people watching, at least from the demographics of people talking earlier, but it's only a 7-hour drive. So if you guys are road trippers, or if you're going to go up towards Yellowstone anyway, like, just stop. I just Googled it because I was sitting here thinking, I was like, we haven't gone on a road trip in a while. That would be fun. And it's only 7 hours, which for some people's a lot. I get it. But in raw reality, in our world today, that's not very far. And it's just such a, I don't know, like you said, healing, transformative. And it's thanks to you and thanks to your mother that we have those sites preserved today so that people can experience that and we can all connect together as a community and as Americans. So thank you for what you do. And thank you for this book, which again, you all can purchase at tatteredcover.com. We greatly appreciate the local support of your local community bookstore. Shirley, if you'll stay on just for a minute while I close this out here. My name is McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. And I just thank you guys again for shopping local. For some of you there who may not have eaten dinner yet, you can always order from a local mom and pop restaurant. We really appreciate your help during these times. Thank you guys again. Stay safe and happy reading. Thanks, everyone. And we're out.
Oh,
You did